So TDE artist and legendary battle rapper Daylyt, he sat down with an interview with Curtis King where they discussed several things related to music, but one thing in particular they talked about was the beef with Drake and Kendrick Lamar, the beef heard around the world that we all lived through last year. And he talked about what he believes is the biggest mistake that Drake made during that beef that made his loss inevitable. I want to get into what he discussed, and I want to talk about if I think that truly is the biggest mistake or if there was another mistake or mistakes that Drake made that were actually more impactful. But before I get into that, make sure you guys like and subscribe. My name is Mfasis, and this is a podcast that I'm doing where I want us to all explore the hip hop cinematic universe where we put the art over the algorithm. So, Daylyt, when he was talking to Curtis King, he says that he believes that when Drake said you're rapping like you're trying to get the slaves free, that was the biggest mistake that Drake made. Now, for the people that don't remember, on Family Matters, when Drake said, he had a lyric where he said, hey, you rapping like you're trying to get the slaves freed. Now, a lot of people were not fond of that statement, which makes sense. It's kind of a tone deaf statement. Um, and also, real quick for the record, I'm not a Drake or a Kendrick stan. I like both of them musically, for different reasons, but I like both of them musically. So I feel like I'm probably one of the more reasonable and fair people who can look at this objectively compared to a lot of other people who are fanboys of one or the other. But so when Drake said that lyric, at the time I said, I don't know if that's the way to go. But I kind of see what he's going for because, regardless of how you guys feel, you could make the argument that, hey, Kendrick is putting a heavy emphasis on only one aspect of the quote unquote black experience. And I have to put it in quotations because every black person doesn't have the same experience in America. Like that's not how that works. There's plenty of, I know a lot of black people love to highlight a lot of things related to pain and suffering, but the fact of the matter is more than 50% of black people in America have lived in the suburbs. They live in the suburbs and they've lived there their whole lives. Like there's plenty of black people who are not dealing with some of the more heavier topics that a lot of rappers like Kendrick and other people they're simply not experiencing that. I know a lot of y'all want to make it seem like it's something like if that's not the case, but that is the case. There's a lot of black people that they can't relate to what you're talking about being in Compton. But that's neither here nor there. So Drake said what he said, and I feel like it was very tone deaf because number one, Drake's not American. Then also number two, I don't think Drake or his ghostwriters, I just don't think they're capable of nuanced thinking. So I'm like, I don't think diving into that sort of angle is a good idea. And Daylyt says that he believes that one lyric made it easy for Kendrick to make Not Like Us. He didn't necessarily say that without that lyric, Kendrick would have never made Not Like Us, but he implied that without that lyric, Not Like Us would have never existed. Now, I get that argument, but I believe that there was two completely different mistakes that Drake made that were more impactful and that also caused Not Like Us to happen. And I wanted to talk about that. So first, Taylor made freestyle. To me, that was one of the two biggest mistakes that he made, where he did something that, see, Taylor made freestyle is a very fascinating song to me because it's a very bold decision for him to, create an AI Tupac and Snoop Dogg. It's very bold, but also it's very tone deaf. So like if I knew Drake, I would have told him don't drop that song. That's a bold idea, but it's like I don't think you can really pull that off. And he didn't. The song was okay, but the song was okay. It's kind of funny, but ultimately, like I said, this goes into the tone deaf aspect of it where I feel like Drake just simply didn't truly understand like how much California loves Tupac. Like even though Tupac, he was born in New York and he's really Tupac's from Baltimore. He spent most of his life in Baltimore. Regardless of that, he moved to Cali at like 17 and Cali has embraced him and he's an icon in California. So to me, I just thought that was a very bad idea. and it wasn't worth it in the end. It's, in my opinion, it just wasn't worth it. And the reason I say that is such a big mistake is because, understand, once Drake dragged Tupac and Snoop Dogg into it, it now allowed for Kendrick to have an easier time galvanizing the West Coast around him as he attacks Drake and as he buries Drake. It makes it that much easier. So not only does Not Like Us come out, where you can interpret the term Not Like Us several different ways, but one of the ways, in my opinion, you could interpret it is him talking about being from a certain culture, being from a certain community, or just simply being from Cali or being American, and just, hey, Drake cannot relate to that, because if he could relate to it, he wouldn't have done something as tone deaf as create an AI version of Tupac. And to me, the pop out concert was just as important as Kendrick dropping Not Like Us. That's just my opinion, but I do believe that the pop out show was just as important, because it just showed the muscle, the power that the West Coast has, specifically California, and it shows the not only the unity that they have, but also it also reminds people of the amount of impact and influence that they have, the amount of cultural cachet that they have that Canada simply doesn't have, especially because of the fact that Drake has really not done, in my opinion, he hasn't done a good enough job of making sure Toronto, Canada as a whole, or specifically Toronto, he hasn't done a good enough job helping Toronto develop a stronger wave of music collectively within the mainstream. And when I say mainstream, of course, I'm talking about America. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand that Drake has brought some Canadian artists on tour with him, guys like I think at one point he brought like Smoke Dogg and Pressa on tour with him, and he squashed his beef with Tory Lanez and they became cool. Yeah, he helped introduce The Weeknd. Well, The Weeknd's not a rapper, but still, like, he's done. Drake has done some stuff that you could say has kind of helped Toronto kind of gain some sort of footing within the mainstream that is America. But overall, in my opinion, I don't think Drake has done nearly enough to really help Toronto develop a really strong presence within hip hop overall. And it's not to say there haven't been artists from Toronto to blow up. I mean, you've had guys obviously like Drake and Tory Lanez, and then you also could even go back to guys like Cardinal and Vishal. Like, they've had some rappers from Toronto and from Canada as a whole blow up here and there, but not enough to where they have a very strong movement, the type of presence that could rival California, like, just not enough. And I do believe that with the pop out show, with Not Like Us combined with the pop out show, from a public opinion standpoint, it allowed for Drake to be buried that much deeper, because it's a reminder that, hey, Drake, you have no allies out here. And part of that is really your fault. Like, you could have done a better job developing real allies instead of trying to just hop on waves, and he didn't do that. And it kind of came back to bite him in this moment, because Kendrick was able to go lean back on his home base as a as a not a shield, but as backup. I don't know what you would call it. I guess you could just say as backup, as reinforcements. Whereas Drake can't do that with Canada. Drake can't really do a pop out show in Canada. He could do a concert in Canada, but a concert, like, the pop out wasn't just any concert. The pop out was essentially a very turned up funeral where they're pissing on your grave. Like, that's it's a very different vibe. And I just don't think I don't think Canada's strong enough culturally to be able to pull that off. And I don't even think Canada's fully behind Drake. So that's not. So it's a double whammy. Like, I just don't think Drake would have been able to pull that off. So I think Tailor-Made Freestyle was a bigger mistake. And another mistake that I think was actually bigger than even the Tailor-Made Freestyle, and also bigger than Drake's lyric about having the slaves freed, the true biggest mistake, in my opinion, that Drake made was Drake backtracking on throwing Future under the bus. Like Drake refusing to throw Future under the bus, I think was a terrible decision because he was, mind you, he was already taking shots at Future, but he backtracked on Family Matters, which I thought was dumb. In my opinion, the best possible angle that Drake could have used against Kendrick Lamar, it would have required him to just throw Future under the bus, and he should have did it. He should have done it. And what I'm talking about is like hear me out, guys. So here's the thing. On the song Meet the Grams, and mind you, Meet the Grams is a song that many people think was actually more damaging than Not Like Us. I disagree, but many people feel that way. But on Meet the Grams, remember, on Meet the Grams, most of that song is really just Kendrick shaming Drake and saying that Drake is a bad father, he's a deadbeat father, and all of this stuff. And, you know, and at the end of the day, to me, it's extremely hypocritical for you if for it's extremely hypocritical for Kendrick to say that about Drake, but then you're hopping on a song with a guy like Future. And like I said earlier in this video, guys, I'm not a stan of Drake or Kendrick, so I feel like I can really call this objectively and call it like it is. At the end of the day, from an integrity standpoint, if Kendrick actually cared about Drake being a deadbeat father, if Kendrick actually cared about that type of stuff, like really he just couldn't stand deadbeats and all of that, there's no way possible Kendrick would have been willing to do a song with a guy like Future. Like, as far as we know, Drake only has one kid. Kendrick claims that Drake has a second, but Kendrick provided no proof. At the end of the day, we know that that Future has at least 8 kids or whatever, by like 8 different women all over the place. So if you really cared about it, deadbeat fathers and people not being in their kids' lives, there's no way you would actually do a song with a guy like Future. If Drake had pointed out this one simple fact, this one simple thing, in my opinion, that would have neutralized most of what Meet the Grams was. Because if you pointed out this one simple fact, if you pointed out this one simple angle, once Kendrick drops Meet the Grams, people are gonna look at that song differently because they're gonna say, how can you sit there and claim that? How could you sit there and wag your finger at Drake and say he's just his bad deadbeat and you hate that so much about him, but meanwhile you've done multiple collaborations with Future, who's confirmed to be a much bigger deadbeat than Drake could ever be? Because I don't care what any of you say, you can't crank out 6, 7, 8 kids with all these different people and actually be in those kids' lives. It's not possible. You don't have enough time in a day, especially when you're literally a superstar. Future is a superstar. He doesn't have time to travel around the country and be in the lives of like 8, 9, 10, 20 different kids. Like, come on, man. So to me, I thought that was very hypocritical of Kendrick. And because Drake is a coward, Drake is too cowardly to point out this one thing, because once he points this out, that kind of throws Future under the bus. And Drake desperately wants to get cool with Future again. And another reason I think that, and well, real quick, just to wrap it up, like I said, I believe that if Drake had pointed this out, this would have taken most of the sting out of Meet the Grams. Because once you point this out, if Kendrick hops on Meet the Grams and he's saying, oh, you're a bad dad, and oh, poor Adonis, and oh, you have this secret child that nobody can find any evidence of, and all of this stuff, like, that wouldn't be possible. Like, well, it would be possible because the song exists, but it wouldn't be impactful because people would just look at Kendrick and say, well, who cares what you think about him allegedly being a deadbeat? You clearly don't have a problem with deadbeats if you do songs with Future. And another reason I think that Drake not throwing Future under the bus was such a big mistake was because once Kendrick was able to have that sting on Meet the Grams by shaming Drake and saying he's a deadbeat father and all that, once he was able to have that sting, it also allowed for Kendrick to kind of also parlay that into the angle of like saying, "Hey, LeBron, keep the family away. Hey, Steph Curry, keep the family safe." And of course, that transitions into, allegations of Drake touching kids, which to me is the thing that makes Not Like Us so popular and so potent as a diss record. Because yes, on the third verse of Not Like Us, yes, Kendrick does acknowledge Drake's slaves freed statement, and he acknowledges that and does a whole verse talking about Drake being a culture vulture and all that. It's a good verse, but it's not nearly as impactful as Kendrick saying A minor. It's not nearly as impactful. Like Kendrick saying A minor, that is far more impactful. It just is, guys. It just is. Now, I know the third verse to Not Like Us, but let's be realistic. Do you think the average person is out here really memorizing all of that? No. But A minor, everybody can remember that. That's literally the the catchiest part of the song. So I don't know. These are just these to me, these are the two biggest mistakes that Drake's made in that battle with Kendrick. And I do believe that the future angle that Drake chose not to use against Kendrick, I do believe that ultimately was the biggest mistake. But you may disagree. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below.